That's about memory. Clark is my exterior memory bank. When would that have been? This will be 2000, and this will be '01. So, and I'll just throw something out, and you go. And this will be the number of the month. So I'll go, let's see, our first screening for Tom and Pam was...
Hi, my name is Dean DeBlois, and I am one of the writers and directors of Lilo and Stitch. I work together with Chris Sanders to write, storyboard, and direct the film. And in the process, we balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Who are you?
Chris, he's a guy all about energy. His energy is always up. He's always super excited. He's got just tons of enthusiasm and oftentimes could be bouncing off the walls. And Dean is very even keel. And so it's kind of the perfect combination because Chris might be talking about, okay, we gotta do this, we gotta do this, we gotta do this, and Dean will sort of be the calming factor that comes in and says, okay, we gotta focus for a second. Let's tackle this thing first and see how it impacts the rest of the story going forward. So I think that actually helps kind of counterbalance the two of them. They're both terrible procrastinators. They love to procrastinate everything till the very last minute, and they'll always tell stories of how they would be storyboarding film or storyboarding sequences in the film, and they'd be calling each other at 3 in the morning because the next day they had to actually show these sequences. And they kind of felt like they were in high school or college all over again, where the exam was the next day and they hadn't done any studying and suddenly they had to cram. Chris eats meat and Dean's a vegetarian. Chris eats anything with sugar in it. Dean's not quite so hot on the sugar category. They both love the macabre. They love anything that's about death and anything that's kind of wacky. They love wacky stuff.
It'd be great if you could just tell me how you started drawing and illustrating. And
just like in general?
You want to go?
Yeah. Back in Colorado Springs, when I was a little kid, my dad, he was, I think he was fancying himself to be an oil painter. And he had like all the really good smelling stuff all over the floor all the time and stuff. And I was very interested in that. But once a week we would have like drawing night. And we'd all, me and my brother, my sister, and my dad, we'd all gather around the dining room table. And it was like watercolor night. And we would all dip our brushes in the same glass of water and paint. And that was fantastic.
A school bully who was, he just wanted to pummel me every day after school. And I was one of the kids, I was called a walker. So I would walk home from school and he would wait for me. My tactic was to wait until everyone disappeared and hopefully he would disappear too, which just made myself all the more vulnerable when I decided to leave. I was like the lone kid trying to make his way across the schoolyard, and he would come out from behind a corner and, you know, just like in some old movie, start beating up on me. And finally, for a while, my sister was able to stave off the attacks and threaten him, and, you know, but she wasn't always there. And one day in particular, I'd actually gone to her class to see if she was still there, and she had left, and I thought, oh no. And so out of the shadows came this guy, I can't remember his name. Anyway, but he came after me, and I said, okay, stop. I will draw you a picture of Darth Vader if you leave me alone. And at the time, Star Wars was all the rage. And he was, you know, he had his fist cocked and he said, really? And I said, yeah, and it'll be good, I promise.
I think near the end of my senior year, I still hadn't decided what to do with myself. And my grandmother was reading the newspaper and she said, oh, here's something you might want to do. And she cut out this article about this school in California called CalArts, where like Disney people were teaching animation.
I tried to be a comic book artist at first and realized that not living near any of the big labels was a problem. So I went into animation college and decided to try that out.
So I got to the end of high school, I like made a portfolio as fast as I could and sent it off, and that was the only place I applied. I applied to that one place.
I am Canadian, so coming to work in the States means that you have to have a certain amount of experience before you can get a work visa here. So at the time when I went to college in Sheridan, which is just outside of Toronto, I knew that the two best studios to work for at the time were Don Bluth's studio and the Walt Disney Studios. So what I decided to do was I went to work. I got a job at Don Bluth's studio, and I figured if I could put in a couple of years there, that would be the experience that I needed to get a work visa in the States.
It's a mystery how you get in there. And I never saw myself going to the story department. That's the thing, that when you watch the making of shows, at some point the host will walk past a room and it'll have the word story on it. And he'll go, it all starts with a good story. And you're like, yeah, what goes on in that room? And they pretty quickly go on to the more glamorous, I think more showy part of it, which is the animators and the people who color and paint and do the backgrounds. And story isn't spent a lot of time on. And it wasn't until I got to Disney Studios that I started working in story, and I realized that that's where I wanted to be. I felt that was where the action was.
Well, Disney was always the pinnacle, I think, for anyone getting into animation who wants to work as a commercial animator. The idea of being able to work at the legendary studio that created all of the films you study it's really a lofty goal. So when I was hired, it was such a relief, and yet I knew I was starting over, because I'd become not a big fish in a little pond, but I came to know everyone that worked for the Don Bluth studio, and I felt pretty confident about what I was able to do. And I knew that going to work for the Disney studio crew meant resetting everything. Working with people whose names I've seen in books and whose work I've admired and tried to imitate, and I was going to be in the same halls with them, you know, working side by side with them, and that was really intimidating. It was exciting, but intimidating, and I knew that it's better to be fearful than to be comfortable.
Dean started out at Disney as a layout artist, and in the very beginning of Mulan, we didn't have a lot of layouts we needed, so Dean asked if he could come over. As I remember it, Dean asked to come over and do some story, and he did, and he was great. And it didn't take long before all of us were going, well, can Dean just stay in story? I think that clearly that's where Dean wanted to be. So Pam Coates made that happen.
You know, my first experience with Chris Sanders, I just started with the Disney Company in 1989, and I was a production assistant. And we used to be housed in these big, almost warehouse-like buildings, for lack of a better word, and the artists used to play rubber band games, and they would make these fake guns and these really huge, thick rubber bands, and they would shoot them at each other. And we used to all be in cubes, and I was assigned to the story department as a production assistant on a movie called Rescuers Down Under. And one of my very first experiences with Chris Sanders was in the middle of a rubber band fight.
Production was a little behind, as often the productions are, and so I was sent to California instead of my higher place of Florida. And I was supposed to work with the story department, helping them design sets. But when I arrived there, no one really knew what to do with me, and they hadn't heard that I was coming, and so I just started working with the story guys.
And he did a sequence in the movie that was just mind-blowing, fabulous. And the sequence changed very little from the day he pitched it to the day the movie released. And we saw what he had done, and we said, you know, Dean, you're staying in story. You're not going to go anywhere. You're going to stay right here in story and do the movie with us. And that's how they initially met. Dean and Chris met on Mulan.
In the fall of 1997, we had this terrific opportunity to sort of look at where we stood film-wise at the company. Michael Eisner invited a lot of us to come up to Vermont and talk about the state of animation.
Michael's mother had this apple orchard, and Michael invited us all to spend a weekend picking apples, cheap labor, I think, looking at the fantastic fall colors and talking about what animation could be. And in that session, we talked about the styles of movies. And one idea grew out of it, that what could be the Dumbo for our generation, meaning what could be a smaller movie that comes out as a real expression of an artist that is both simpler from production value point of view, but no less simple or heartfelt than any of the big movies.
So out of that particular retreat, I think, came the notion that maybe we ought to be looking in a little different way for our stories than we had been. There was a tendency to kind of look for the big epic whatever, and that it was okay to look under rocks for smaller stories as well as the big ones.
Could we make a film that was technologically more simple, but more rich and unusual in story. A film that would be sort of adventurous that way, take risks.
Would we make a movie for less money and empower one artist or a couple of artists to make their movie? And then I just sort of sat there, yes, we're going to commit to do that. And Michael Eisner asked me at the time, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I have an idea, and I'll let you know. And I went and met with Chris Sanders. And I said, Chris, you have to be the one who comes up with the big idea.
And it was really that idea that spurred Chris Sanders to go back to an idea he had had way back in 1984, which was to have this character Stitch be made into a movie.
It was this thing that had failed as a children's book, but I thought maybe it would work as a film. So I came in with this idea of Lilo and Stitch, the movie.
Chris Sanders had worked into his contract the ability to develop a new project, and he was going to be able to direct. Not necessarily that project, but it was his next assignment to be able to direct something. So he had this idea on the back burner for a long time, and I was one of the first people he brought it to, and he said, you know, I've got this character,
And it's going up. And this is Stitch, and we'll just write in what's happening. And I would write on the panel. And those are the ones, of course, that go into the making of books, because this brilliant moment in the film was accomplished with this storyboard. It's like, Stitch is surprised.
The actual setting was in Kansas, and Tom Schumacher was in Florida, I think, and Chris was in Florida working on Mulan. He was the head of story on Mulan, and he pitched him the Lilo and Stitch story.
The first time the basic idea was pitched was actually at a karaoke bar in Orlando, Florida.
And he seemed to suddenly know where he wanted to go to dinner, which was the little karaoke restaurant at the Swan. But they don't start the karaoke until like 9 o'clock.
The big joke was, I had said to Chris, Chris, we're going to this, because it was the only place you could get sushi at Walt Disney World at that time. I said, we'll go and we'll have dinner, but it becomes a karaoke bar, so you're going to have to pitch your idea, otherwise we're going to be forced to sing. And I'm convinced, actually, that had the singers not been starting, that Chris never actually would have spit the idea out for Lilo and Stitch.
there's not a whole lot of story built around him except for the fact that he doesn't know where he came from, and he lives in this forest, and none of the forest animals want anything to do with him. So kind of this estranged creature that's been shut out from the world and without any ability to learn local custom or language or anything. He had learned to mimic the sounds of the rain and the wind and streams, and that's how he communicated. I thought it was really cute, and he really wanted to do something with it. So that was the storyline that he had pitched to Tom Schumacher.
So the very first time I heard about the idea, there was no Lilo. There was no Lilo, there was no Hawaii. It was the story of the Stitch character, who was this alien who had landed on Earth and was living in the forest among other animals.
Tom's initial comment was, you have a character who was, I think Chris had defined as an alien at that point, living in a forest and ostracized by the local forest animal community. And he said, being that forest animals are already living kind of an alien life to us, wouldn't it be better contrast to place this alien character in the human world? And that was really the only guidance he had given at that point. So that was the mission statement. Like, an alien and a little kid, have to sort of figure each other out along this story towards his path to redemption.
We wanted to put it in a finite place, a small town. I really wanted a place where if an alien landed, the army wouldn't show up. You wouldn't be able to draw a crowd. So originally we thought someplace in rural America, like maybe someplace rural Kentucky, rural Kansas, something like that. That had this beautiful sort of peaceful sort of feeling.
That idea developed to having a child involved, then it developed to being Lilo, it developed to actually being not set in continental USA, but actually being set in Hawaii.
On the wall of my room was a big map of Hawaii. I had been there vacationing, and I happened to look up at it, and I was sort of daydreaming, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because that's a rather finite place. I was looking at the island of Kauai. It had a sort of finite quality to it, plus it had that small town atmosphere that we were looking for, plus it had this real visual impact and a visual flavor and a style that was so specific and rich.
I talked to Dean about it, and you thought, well, what about Hawaii? And everybody that was confronted with that idea always sat back for a second and said, huh, Hawaii. I never thought of that.
Chris put together a pitch booklet based on, you know, the ideas. We'd formed a little story. He typed it up. He did some pen and ink illustrations, and he watercolored them and sent those off to the studio execs. And it was very well received. It was a great idea to include the illustrations because it immediately gave an idea of how cute it was. You know, by description, an alien coming into this, you know, this little Hawaiian village and disrupting this girl's life, and it had a lot of dark tones to it. So he wanted to balance it and give the right, you know, the right imagery to sort of leaven it and give it a cute feel.
We started with a stripped-down crew. We started just with me and a few story people, Dean, Chris Williams, John Sanford, going over to Dean's house, having pizza after work, and just talking about this thing off hours.
You know, we'd get together either at my house for pizza and beer, or we would go to, you know, get together at the studio and go have lunch. And it was always talking about the secret project that Chris was developing.
We never put it out in the halls. We kept it behind closed doors. We kept it secret because we thought it would benefit from that.
So Tom came to me and he said, I know you've been working on this film with Chris, and I want you to do it officially, and you're going to get a chance to direct this film. At the time, there was no talk of writing. It was just, you know, start developing, work on it, and you're now officially part of the Lilo and Stitch team, all two of you. Now, go away and try to prove that this thing can work. So secretly, we were just put in a room, and for a year, all we did was write our own script and do our own storyboards, and we had one or two people working with us, just doing some visual development, and Andreas had come on at some point. He was doing some preliminary character designs. But for the most part, we were just left alone to figure it out.
I desperately wanted to capture some little piece of the story process, because from the very beginning, it's been hard for me to explain to people what it's like to find the story, and I do mean find it. My impression has always been that there is a story somewhere in the zone of where you're going, and if you're very sensitive to what the movie begins to tell you, that you will actually find that story. And in Lilo and Stitch, it was no exception. Anyway, I keep thinking about what you talked about a long time ago, pitching this whole idea where Lilo's fish gets killed. And so this is like, I thought of this on the airplane. This is like the Neanderthal version. I'm just going to pitch straight through it. A little red bird like falls out of the tree onto the ground right in front of Lilo and Stitch. And he's like, whack, and he just like hits it and knocks into the bushes. Like, he's just real callous. She grabs it and she just starts running. So David Coena, he's sitting by the telephone and he's waiting for a phone call. And if he picks up the phone when the phone rings, he's going to get this contract to make surfboards, and he's going to get rich. He drops everything to help her. And so he does what Stitch is going to do later in the film. He does everything he can to get this little bird to like a vet or something.
Are they going to save the bird, or is it going to die?
I think they should save it. I think if it died, there'd be just like too much death.
Yeah, as long as she freaks out enough that there's obviously something wrong. Like, she's got a real big issue with death and the fact that it's going to die, because it's just a bird. Birds die all the time, and she sees roadkills on the side of the road.
Well, hello, here we are. We are in Hawaii, and we are looking at the belladonna, which actually grows upside down. It is probably, perhaps, one of the most poisonous plants in Hawaii.
Oh, Mo!
What does it do?
Thank you.
It's so beautiful.
It's transferred by rubbing it on your skin.
Which ear should I put it on? This one or this one?
Smells good. Taste it.
Really? Okay.
Nice. You may get a handful, a palmful rather.
What are you doing?
Lucky.
It's incredible. This amazing shell. It's called what? Kahelelani. And he found like 18 the first time, and I'm gonna find one now. So here we go.
Watch behind you.
No! Okay.
They're really small and they're pink. Look at that.
This is a beautiful one.
And you stitch them together?
Stitch them together to make a chalet, and it creates an incredible work of art.
Chris and Dean would go off somewhere, and I'd be like, where the hell are they? Then they come back with these stories, and you're like, you're kidding, that happened? Yeah, it happened, it was great. We met this little old guy, and they talk about these things, and I'm like, and I suddenly realized they're all into all the people. And yet Rick and I are kind of like off our tangent here, you know, painting and going nuts trying to figure out what makes this work. So it was neat to see that. That's what I love about working with everybody. Everybody's got their focus, and we can shift a little bit off, but depending on our job, our focus has to kind of stay there. But we can pull things in to influence that focus.
Hey, buddy.
So I walk into this store on the island of Kauai, just looking at artwork and stuff, and there's this kind of hippie guy in the store, and he says hi, and we get to talking. Finds out I do animation, cartoons. He starts asking me some questions, and he says, you know, I know a guy that worked on the heavy metal movie. And I say, this is cool. I say, who? What's his name? He says, Joe Gillen. And I'm standing there, I'm just staring at this guy. I say, I'm Joe Gillen. He's like, Joe, it's Mark. Remember me? Long hair, a ponytail, a motorcycle. I didn't recognize you with your short hair. So here I am in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I see this guy I haven't seen in 22 years.
In like the smallest town we could possibly find.
And when I met him, I was hitchhiking to Los Angeles to try and get a job at Disney Animation.
She was like one of the cutest little girls, but she was totally morose.
Really?
I love this. This looks like a gangster on vacation. You know, he's got huge teeth, and I mean, that smile is just like, it's so ferocious, it scares you away. His fingers are kind of adjustable. I mean, they can slide around in this shape and in that shape. Claws are long, but they're dull, because dull claws cause you more pain. They tend to tear rather than slice. Feet are very stubby and powerful. The feet claws, we sort of treated them like acorns. Big ears, huge ears, in fact. Look at that. How can you not love that? He's just delightfully demonic, you know.
We, as a limitation, wanted to not have Stitch ever talk, to see if we could make him a character that existed only in pantomime. And that only goes so far, because being the naughty imp that he is, he needs to make sounds. So we thought, okay, we'll get a sound guy to come in later and stuff. But when we started pitching the boards, there's this little voice that I do to annoy friends at work.
Chrissy, Chrissy.
And to amuse myself.
Chrissy, I love you. What are you doing? Are you hungry? Because I'm hungry.
And I would assign that little noise to Stitch. As we went forward, though, we realized, oh, golly, he really does have to say a few things. In fact, it comes down at the end of the film to him saying something of great significance, because he has to indicate that he's been working on this whole family thing in his head. And we were in the uncomfortable position of hiring somebody to come in and just make noises and squeak and grunt, mostly. And we couldn't imagine a more uncomfortable situation as having an actor of some prominence come in and saying, oh, no, 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 no. That normal voice of yours, don't use that. Just grunt and squeak and bark and burp.
You take Stitch apart.
Come on, what's the big deal?
You take Stitch apart.
Yeah, something like that.
You take Stitch apart.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Blue punch buggy. No punch back. No punch back. No punch back.
So Dean wisely said, well, you make those noises all the time. Why don't you just start doing the voice and we'll see what happens later. So I started filling in the voice and filling in the voice. Every time we had a recording session, I would just go in at the end of the recording session, do a little bit, we'd stick it in. I think that people just simply got used to it after a while. I got used to it, everybody got used to it.
Too monkey-like? And a little too long, I think.
Huh? Ow! 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 Ow!
Okay.
LP,
40, 84, take 4. Oh, ow, ow, ow! Oh, ow, ow, ow! Oh, ow, ow! Oh, ha! Oh, ow, ow! Oh, ow, ow!
My favorite's the second one.
See, one of the early concepts for Lilo is that she was a future Stitch, or she was Stitch in the past. Back when Stitch had a gang, and he was a grown-up, and he was like maybe 30 years old, we thought to ourselves, well, maybe he was in Lilo's position when he was younger. Maybe he lost his family, and he ended up being a bad character because of it. Lilo is Stitch earlier. She just lost her family, and the possibility that she'll lose her sister and she'll be put into a foster home, all these things might spin her into a really disastrous place. That was our original concept. It changed a lot when Stitch became an orphan or became a genetic mutation. But yes, they were sort of the same character.
From a very early age, she's lost a lot of her stability. She's lost her parents. She's about to lose the only guardian she has that's familiar to her. So bit by bit, her world's being stripped away, and she's going to be left with nothing. And that's definitely the setup for a character who's not going to care about anything.
When I came onto the movie, they were in the process of listening to a lot of girls and found DeVay Chase very early on.
What are we gonna do?
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 I think number 3 is great.
We needed to find a little girl who I think had an inherently odd thing going on, because we had written her very strangely. That she had all these sweet qualities, but she also found her character on the dark side of things. So we kept looking and looking and looking until one day a little girl came in and gave us a reading that had a haunted quality to it. And she had kind of a haunted quality to herself. And I remember that she would lean forward, and the test lines were very explosive. She was doing that speech about Pudge the fish, where she had to get really upset. And she would sit in the chair very benignly, and we'd go, okay, go ahead. And she would lean forward, and she'd do this crazy off-the-wall reading of the line, and then after she was done, she'd sit back down and just go quiet again. She looked a little tired, and we said, wow, that was great. She's like, thanks.
It's all you! Knock 'em dead! It's all you! Knock 'em dead!
So DeVay, who was a little older than Lilo would be, sounded young enough, and most importantly had that spark, that sort of, you know, this spirit, whatever makes Lilo. You know, it was only her really who had that, I thought.
She exists on the dark side, which is a lot of her energy character-wise comes from this sort of dark side of her psyche that she's fascinated with, mummies and death and things like that, that she carried with her, these things that are, I think, more female things, this belief in family and these really sort of, this faith. She has a great deal of faith.
Clark Spencer is producer of the movie, and he had never produced before, and in fact, I think it's safe to say Clark never led a creative process before. And leading and managing, and then leading and managing a creative process are two very different things.
So I was in finance and strategy planning for Walt Disney Studios, working with all the different divisions, and I was looking at a project over in Hong Kong to set up the Disney Channel over in East Asia. And my boss gave me a call one day and he said, there's a project we need to get done at the feature animation division, and it's about looking where we're going to build the next animation studio. And he asked me who on my team I wanted to work on that project, and I said, well, I wanted to work on that project. So I flew back from Hong Kong and started working with Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher. And the project was basically to set up the third animation studio for Disney, and we ended up setting up that studio in Paris, France. And so that was kind of my entree into feature animation. And I did finance and planning for feature animation and became the CFO for that division. And then I got an email from Peter Schneider, actually while I was over at the Paris studio, and he asked if I'd be willing to move to Florida and head up the animation studio down there. And I thought this was kind of a great opportunity to get myself out of finance and planning and into general management. So I took the position and moved my life down to Orlando, Florida, and started running it.
I went to see him. I flew to Florida. We try to get down there as frequently as possible. And I asked him if he would consider being on a very short list to produce the movie. Well, the list was really short because he was the only person on the list.
And I didn't know Chris or Dean at all, and she suggested that we go to lunch, talk about the movie and myself and them. So we had lunch at an Italian restaurant in Florida, and we really hit it off.
Clark worked with Chris and Dean really, really well. And one of, I think, the important things a producer can do with the director or directors in this case is to figure out how to sort of be the, now I'm going to use a sports analogy and it may be completely wrong, but anyway, to be sort of the blocker for them. They get ahead of the directors and the vision and try to give them as much room to be creative as possible. So the producer gets up front and sort of puts his arms out and keeps things away from breaking the creative process.
They knew me because I was heading up the Florida studio, and they'd seen me on video conference, and they were looking for a producer, and they had talked to a lot of people in LA, and Dean, I think, actually said to Pam one day, you know, that Clark guy on the other side of the video screen, he seems like a nice guy. And he seems like someone who knows the Florida studio. What about him? And from there, they asked me if I wanted to come out and produce it. As I sit here in huff and puff.
Clark was a great stabilizer for both Chris and Dean. He's a great listener, and he always made it really easy for them and for me, because he was sort of my liaison into the movie, trying to figure out what the show needed, what the directors needed, how the studio was doing.
But I would argue that you said, let's do watercolor. Well, and you persevered, and you fought everybody. Everyone said, there's no way we can pull this off. It's not going to happen. It's going to cost too much money. It's going to take too long. And you said, we're going to do it, and you did it.
And you know what? It didn't cost more than any other movie, and they did a great job, and it was like 70 weeks in a row, made quotas, like, what, you know, it was great.
It was an art form that was considered kind of dated. You know, they'd done a few films with that look. And Walt's first mission was to try to bring a storybook alive. And so he'd gone back to a lot of the illustrations that always accompanied, you know, Grimm's fairy tales or Hans Christian Andersen, watercolor, like Arthur Rackham type illustrations. And once he was able to do that, you know, he was interested in technology, he was interested in pushing the boundaries of reality. And I think that's when oil paint was experimented with, and, you know, eventually people got into gouache. There's also a belief that it was just really difficult, and it was abandoned because it was a process that was slow.
Watercolor actually was very difficult in traditional animation always because of just the nature of the materials, and pressing them down under the platen and under lights and stuff was hard on them, and they would stick, the colors would come off, stick to cells, and be some problems. Early animation, there was a lot of watercolor, and when the gouache paints came along and were readily available and mixable and had actually quite a lot wider range of color and trueness to color, they changed. This company at least changed almost completely. But everybody all the painters were watercolorists, or many of them were anyway to start with. So they still painted with the new paint as if it was a watercolor, so that it kind of retained that look. Going back, it's amazing how different watercolor though now looks as compared to the way the other kinds of painting styles evolved.
Watercolor was used for the backgrounds, never for the characters. Because even in Pinocchio and Bambi, the characters are, from the drawings, hand-inked on these cells, on these clear cells, one more time in outline, then turned over, and then painted. And it's a kind of a flat paint, but these guys in the old days, they drew so dimensionally that even that kind of a painting, even though it had flat paint, it would look dimensionally, especially in motion. They later on turned more toward graphics because they all were influenced by Picasso and modern art, and things became graphic for something like Sleeping Beauty or 101 Dalmatians. But they had done this round stuff for so long that they were even now able to turn graphics dimensionally and make that look plausible. You have to be a dynamite artist with lots of experience to do that. The watercolor thing is just something would give it like a new edge because it hadn't been done. It just hasn't been done before.
I think it was only the next meeting or so that we had with Rick, and he was already backing off that position a little bit, going, you know, there's other ways to get that watercolor look. And of course, Dean and I were like, well, what do you mean? Why don't you just do watercolors? Well, you know, we haven't done that for a while, and I think we can do a standard gouache treatment, and it would have that watercolor look. And we said, oh no. So we had Rick go away and do identical paintings, one in gouache, replicating the watercolor look, and the other in watercolor. And there was absolutely no comparison. One of them had this transparency, this luminosity that Rick had pointed out comes from the light actually passing through the paint, hitting the white paper behind it, and then passing back through the pigment, lit from behind, just like a stained glass window.
Well, it's a completely different style of painting, and the techniques are different, and even color theory is different using watercolor, because you're layering transparent colors on top of each other instead of obscuring them with opaque colors. So for the painters, it was just a completely different mindset.
You're actually seeing almost like a transparent stained glass-like effect, and that's why it's so rich and vibrant, the color. And if you opaqued any level of color, you would kill that look. And by killing that look, then it doesn't look like watercolor anymore. You're just doing acrylic or gouache, which are opaque mediums. And so we had to really learn not to get too quick at putting down our washes. You really had to be a thinker when you painted. You couldn't sit there and just put something down and then obliterate it later. You had to know that whatever you're putting down at first was going to show up at the end. So your first steps in your painting always show up at the end.
And that comes through even on film. So it was Rick Sluder's idea, and then we forced him to go out and get it, which he and his team from Florida did brilliantly. They had to relearn that technique.
So here's these, 15 artists that all of a sudden thrown on a project and say, you're going to have to learn how to paint watercolor, which is the most intimidating medium to use. And so we go into this whole training session, not knowing what we're getting into, bringing in all these workshops, and they just took to it like a duck to water.
The one thing that was different for me was learning how to simplify my tones and bring them down to a small number of tones from gradations from light, medium to dark. Cutting those down so they're easier to do in watercolor. Because if something's very busy and there's lots of tonal changes, it's really hard to do and less pleasing a watercolor, I think, in the end.
And we started confining things. They call it designing in a box. We started designing the way we're going to do the watercolors within a limited palette, a limited number of colors, 6 or 7 brushes, and a definite paper we're going to paint on, and a definite way of approaching it, which we took the paper and we glued it onto the illustration board to make it more stable. Within that, everybody knew they were on the same surface. It's like kind of walking in on a basketball court, and you're watching all the players. And to me, it's like, it's amazing to see the way Kid might play, and I mean Kid as in the player Kid, versus Michael Jordan. And that's the same thing I felt like as I watched each person started to grow in watercolor. You would start getting this feeling like Barbara Massey. She had this sensitive way of painting, and and it was just this beautiful thing, and these subtle tones and colors. Yet Dave Wong would be a little bit bolder, So I loved seeing that difference. And myself, I'd probably shift somewhere in between those two. So everybody was finding this way of doing it, and I think that was neat to see that yet they were using all the same materials, the same layouts, the same ideas and concepts, yet finding where they worked, playing one up a little bit more than another, that gave that variety of how they would do things.
A lot of what we do is find a way to frame the character without being too obvious about it, but have it so that it's, when the audience looks at the screen, the first thing they're going to look at is the characters, because there's only a few seconds between each shot to really see what you're looking at. And if we do too much to the background, then you start looking around at the other things rather than the characters, and that's not what we want. Unless it's a shot about the environment, then that's where we would change that. But 90% of the time, it's always going to be about the characters.
I even have a very rare, and maybe the only one. It's a Lilo partially painted in Opus 1 wine, 1994, I believe, where we spilled some wine on a tablecloth, or a paper tablecloth at a restaurant in Florida during the making of the movie, and Chris smudged it around and drew a Lilo around it, and the wine is sort of color in her face. It's a treasured possession of mine, framed on the wall in my office here at the house. It's the only wine watercolor painting of the characters.
You're on.
I'm on? Oh, okay. I just think we should film the time that Dean and Blah walked into the story room for our big story meeting. It started at 9 o'clock.
Where's Sanders?
That's the question.
Yeah, let me pan around the room.
We'll film the time that
Let's
he
look for
walked.
Sanders. Not much of a sign of him around here. Is he under the desk?
Wait, let's see. Is he under the desk?
I don't think so.
Maybe he's up there.
Possibly. Kind of update where we are right now in the process of making this movie. Like what just happened.
Oh, okay. We have most of our first act in production. We have a third act that's been boarded, but it's kind of rough. The whole movie has been boarded, but our second act proved to be remarkably directionless and not fulfilling character-wise.
We finally showed a screening of the whole movie so that we could just stop trying to forge ahead and just go back into Act 2, right?
So what we started by doing was putting each of the characters' names up and talking about what each of them would need to do and wants to do and would like to do. And we started listing them out, and happily we found that Stitch and Lilo had the most things that they could be doing and that we wanted them to do. We felt that the notion of sequences, which we've always worked with here at Disney, was harming us because a sequence, by definition, has a one-sentence title. For instance, Cobra goes to the moon, or Cobra wakes up, or something like that. Well, you've got a whole sequence now where, by definition, only one thing is going to happen. And we felt, after seeing our second act, that so few things happened, and our characters were so rich and so intricate that they should be meshing more, and we should have much more layers happening at once. So we decided to discard the notion of sequences and just talk about the film as a series of days and what we want to have happen. Just like, well, what would he do next? It's like, well, he'd want to get away. He takes a big wheel. He tries to get away, learns it's an island because he keeps hitting shore. Now he's depressed. Okay, we're just like following his moods and stuff. Now he's depressed, so they go to a coffee shop. What can happen at the coffee shop? Well, at the coffee shop we meet the guy who runs it or the girl who runs it, and we get a chance for them to kind of be nice to Lilo and kind of indicate that the town knows what's going on, which is something that Chris Williams had pointed out.
I wanted to get the feeling that the town was concerned about Lilo.
Right? Right, and you also want to get the, yeah, it's like the whole small town that we wanted to find different ways of showing that this town was a community. This little island is a community. These were some of the visual notes we're making here. We want to make sure, this is just an idea that Chris Williams had, that we want to make sure that Stitch gets treated like a dog, and David's the only one that'll really pet him, everybody else is scared of him. But then when he does pet him, he's like, "Get your words like a dog, and he can boogie boogie wood. He should eat a doggy, he should eat a doggy," and he'll be like babying him, and Stitch wants to kill him because of that, so he's got a little starting, reaching for the power saw to kill him. Speedo on Bubbles. I want Lilo to teach Stitch to nod yes and no. Him not knowing. The whole idea is that he doesn't know the parameters of what a dog can and can't do, so he'll listen to her. Luau. Everybody's the Luau. This is Dean's thing where Cobra Bubbles runs into Nani. They're all going surfing. He asks her a bunch of questions about life jackets.
That's actually Chris's idea.
Chris Williams' idea?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just drew it up.
Dino and Chris' idea. I'm an idea man. I want a running gag that Stitch hates being kissed, and Lilo really wants to kiss him. So every time she does kiss him, he rubs his head on the ground. Just a little idea that I didn't want to lose, that he destroys flowers whenever he sees them. I want the idea that Nani thinks he's a dog, so she's like, "You're a dumb dog. You're the stupidest dog I ever saw." And of course he understands. She doesn't know that, so that's funny. And then at the luau, I want Jumbo to get a lay and want his picture taken. So these are just
And, sorry, please, there's a Swami.
The Swami idea.
Oh, and then these little ones.
The stupidest idea we can think of. Jumbo and Pleakley are going to try to get Lilo to trade her dog. He's going to try the tactic of saying, "We have a pet trading day, free day to trade pets for something better." And the thing he's trying to get her to trade the dog for is a Swami. Because Pleakley's faulty research is very faulty, so a Swami is a reasonable thing to trade a dog for.
We build this story reel that starts with just story sketches that are filmed. The editor, who has a really incredibly important job of trying to sort of project onto these sketches, how long will these really take in reality to be fleshed out in animation. We build this thing, which is a scale model of the film, and the neat thing is, as you go forward, rough animation will come in and they'll take that story sketch of yours and they'll pull it out and they'll put in the rough animation. And that story reel becomes the living, breathing film, and every part of it that gets finished just simply gets replaced. until finally color scenes are coming in and all the story sketches eventually will be gone and they'll all be replaced with these scenes.
Lilo,
I'm sorry, I won't do it again.
maybe we should call your sister.
No, I'll be good. I want to dance. I practice.
And that'll be the movie that hits the theater. It's the same thing that we started with. It just got all finished out.
Our job is to head up a department of 80 artists, and our role on the film is to take rough animation drawings and refine them and do what we call putting them on style and on model. And when I say on style, what I'm referring to is each film has a really unique style or sensibility to it. And on Lilo and Stitch, for example, we were trying to capture the Chris Sanders style.
Chris doesn't think he has a style, and I don't think until Lilo and Stitch got made he realized that he actually drew in this particular way. I think he just, oh, I'm just going to sit down and draw, and he draws the way that he's drawn ever since he was a kid. But in trying to come up with the characters to fill Lilo and Stitch's world, we kind of had to break down exactly what he does, like how he turns a line, what he does with fabric, what he does with anatomy. You know, how do girls look in Chris's world? What does a little alien look like in Stitch's world? Chris's world, and just finding out exactly what choices he makes in his brain and trying to guess that, you know, and come up with the closest facsimile of that.
It's an elusive style to sort of capture, and I think the thing that you could most compare it to would be a character like Mickey Mouse. Because people think, oh, Mickey's really simple to draw, but if you get the proportions a little bit off, or if you don't get it quite round enough in the right spots, and there's nothing really to anchor to, whereas a more angular character, you have what we call anchor points. But when you're working with something that's very rounded, it can easily lose appeal.
When I was doing the model sheets for Lilo, he said, you know, the thing is, I draw her, I know who she is, and I've storyboarded her a lot, but I draw her a little bit different each time. I don't care like how big the nose is, you know, for each storyboard, or how long her hair is. You guys have to figure all that out and get the consistency in there. So I had to make choices and look at Chris's storyboard, and I said, if I draw the nose like this all the time, I think she'll look like a garden gnome. I don't think I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this. So it was fine-tuning and picking out things that I would think would work in dimension and movement.
I was finishing Milan, and Rick was already assigned to Lilo and Stitch, and he came to my office. He said, oh, you know, Chris, Dean, they got a character. It's just tailor-made for you. I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. One day, it was a Sunday, actually, they called me at home. And Chris said, Alex, we got a character for you. His name is Stitch, and we want you to do it. I said, okay. And then I hung up, and I did a victory dance with my wife.
Well, Cobra Bubbles started out as a character named Mr. Kalakini, and he was a social worker from I think from the mainland. But he was a much different character. He was a skinny kind of white guy like me, and very different from how Cobra Bubbles wound up. But I think that they decided that they needed someone a little bit more menacing and a little bit more imposing for Lilo to act against, because Lilo is a very strong, outrageous personality, and they needed someone who could come in and kind of, you know, be this anchor to make sure that, you know, she's going to behave herself. And so they cast Ving Rhames as the voice, and that changed everything. So immediately we looked at Ving as, you know, as part of the design, and started to try to design the character around him. And Andreas Deja did some drawings of you know, Ving in kind of cartoon form, and I took those and I tweaked them a little bit, and Chris went over them, and Dean went over them, and eventually we came up with the character of Cobra Bubbles.
Well, there were some problems that I thought we would all have, because there's some very unusual qualities graphically with her. Her eyes are really far apart, more so than any of the other characters that we normally see, and that takes some getting used to. That when you have a 3/4 angle, that far eye is really way, way over. And Chris has a way of drawing that beautifully in his story sketches. But in the animation, we had to go back in and kind of put it back over there where it should be.
One of the things that I thought at first was going to be a disadvantage turned out to be an advantage, which was that he had no pupils. you know, because the eyes kind of give you away, and we usually use the eyes to signal to the audience what the character's thinking, you know, what is going to do and all that. With him, it was all opaque. So it was like, you know, just give the audience the impression that you have no idea what he's going to do next, which is really great, because then you have a character where everybody wants to watch the next move.
When they did change Cobra's appearance, it naturally changed the story as well. It changed the interaction that Lilo would have with the social worker character. You know, no longer would she be pushing this meek little skinny nebbish guy around. She's going to be coming up against this brick wall, you know, Ving, who's just, you know, immovable object, and then the unstoppable force, which is Lilo, just kind of smashing against each other. And that was great. I mean, I think it probably came out a lot more interesting than it would have been if we had kept the Kalakini character. And it's one of these things you never hear about. You know, these things happen all the time very early on in our films, and sometimes like really late in the films. But it's something that makes the film stronger, and that's what Chris and Dean were always dedicated to, was making the film better. You know, they'd be tearing the film apart right up until the very last months of production, trying to make it a better film, and that's, I think, what everyone really admired about them here in Florida.
Actually walking along. And because they're out, they're like not with Nani. He could be doing. He could be like walking upright or doing whatever he wanted to do in number 12.
When he takes down his,
it was just too similar.
He's not going to be like, oh, he got away anymore. It's going to be more. People will be like, oh, what are we going to do? And he's going to be more like, don't worry. It's water. He's not going anywhere. So he's confident.
So now Jamba is enjoying the island.
Yeah.
I understand it's like a vacation.
Well, he's enjoying this moment because he knows Stitch is going to hate having been stuck with her. But even when he tries to escape by water, he knows it's not going to work.
Oh yeah. He plays up really good.
I'm sorry.
We're going
He played very clear and with minimal movement. Squirt, squirt, throw, you know, and he reacts and he throws and she goes. It has a sort of a matter-of-fact pace to it.
Yeah. It's great because we're just keeping that whole water theme alive. He gets squirted outside of the adoption pound. He gets squirted, he gets rained on when he first gets there. And so by the time he steals the canoe and tries to make his escape by sea, it's just a disaster. You know, he gets splashed once, he's like, ah! And then he just keeps getting splashed and splashed, so we'll just make it really clear that he hates water, which would be great because in the drowning sequence, you know, he actually learns to like surfing despite water. So that's a big accomplishment in itself, but then when he drowns, obviously, you know, you see why he hates water so much.
Almost from the beginning, we assigned sort of silly, archetypal voices to the characters, especially the aliens. And in the case of Jumba, he was a Russian scientist. So we just gave him this sort of, when we pitched it, kind of, I think, ridiculously fake Russian accent that we had learned from TV. And the councilwoman was very proper, and we made her very British.
Before we could get the actual actors in, Chris and I would provide voices for all of the characters, or anyone else that we could recruit into the room to do it for us. It's what we call scratch. It's always meant to be temporary. However, oftentimes we haven't had time to go to the official actors to get our dialogue in before someone like Michael Eisner sees it. So I became the pincushion for any scratch upsets. You know, if there was scratch dialogue that was offending people, it was generally mine.
626 was designed as a weapon, but now he has nothing to destroy. What must it be like to have nothing?
Tom Schumacher actually said to me once, he said, your film has a lot of really terrible scratch, but of the terrible scratch, yours is the worst I've ever heard. So, yeah, I'm not an actor.
You see, I never gave him a greater purpose.
The way it usually works is you don't have a design to look at, because that's usually the job of the supervising animator. You come in, there are some rough storyboards, and the characters look a certain way, but they are not finalized yet, and they might not have a voice yet. So you look at the storyboards and you start fiddling around with some designs. Then all of a sudden they find somebody, they have an idea for a voice. Then you listen to the voice tracks, you go back to your drawing, and make sure that it would seem that that voice would come out of that character.
Take note of this. Stitch, I hereby re-sentence you to spend the rest of your life on the ear.
He won't survive in water.
His molecular density is too great. He won't survive in water. His molecular density is too great.
Zoe, that was great. The build on the second line is excellent. We're wondering if we could just get a little more volume so that she can communicate it to the room.
Sneaky Pete. Okay. He won't survive in water. His molecular density is too great.
Or actually take it from him, or no?
No, you just threaten him with it.
Cobra struts over the quickly and snatches the Viewmaster out of his hands.
20 years ago, they took it from you, and you've missed it ever since.
Hey, Cobra Bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
Take a picture.
Okay. And I want my Viewmaster back. You could have mentioned the aliens earlier. You could have mentioned the aliens earlier. You could have mentioned the aliens earlier.
You shouldn't play with guns.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I just remembered. It's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Merry Christmas.
It's not Christmas.
Happy Hanukkah.
It's not Hanukkah.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. Ha! You shouldn't play with guns.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I just remembered. It's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Merry Christmas.
It's not Christmas.
Oh, Happy Hanukkah.
It's not Hanukkah.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
David, take Lilo.
Great.
Number 2. It's very businesslike, actually.
Same kind of attitude when you get to him. You're
Okay.
trying to stop him from going any further. So physically, you're going to rush up to him and just be...
You're going to have me moving towards him.
Yeah.
This isn't what it looks like. This isn't what it looks like.
Well, that would depend on... Oh, well, that would depend on...
Hey, thanks to you.
In New York. Bye.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate it, and we'll see you again, hopefully pretty soon, for the ADR session. Aloha, oi. Ika ona noho. Ika lipu. Tia Carrera and Jason Scott Lee were huge helps as far as the writing went, because we would write what came to mind, and then we would run the pages by them, and oftentimes they would comment on the content and say, well, you know, this isn't really the way it would go down, or it might happen a little more like this, but more often be able to actually shape the dialogue and give us a really authentic feel, both in their delivery but also in the actual scripting of it.
Dun, dun, dun.
Wow.
Do it again, do it again.
Again.
I think you missed the drum on the Zoom.
Yeah, you're
right.
Fun with CLI.
It's a whole block. They like me. They're nuzzling my flesh with their noses. Now they're
Trust me, this isn't gonna end well. Trust me, this isn't gonna end well. Trust me, this is not gonna end well. Go! I'm carrying you, so don't go. I'll go. You stay on. Do you want me to hear my panting?
Grab the ball and show it to him from beyond the glass. And he'll go into little spasms of quiet and struggle.
Я очень хотел
Probably the most uncomfortable experience in filmmaking so far is the test screening. If you're involved in the storytelling, it's excruciating, because really you're putting everything that you believe to be funny or endearing or, you know, emotionally engaging or exciting up on screen, and you're expecting people to tap into your particular tastes and appreciate your sensibilities, and it's not always the case.
We had a leak from the screening. A real one.
Okay. I don't know what the website is. Somebody left this on my desk. Chrissy did. Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada. Oh my god, this is the actual review. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. That's the setup, and here's the actual review. Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada. That was the review! The whole film was yada, yada, yada.
Wow. Does that mean he thinks we're predictable?
I don't know. Ohana means family, and family sticks together and leaves no one behind. The end. The evil of animation is that everything happens in slow motion, so you have ample opportunity to adjust things. It's like moving alongside a glacier. It doesn't move very fast, so you can adjust until the cows come home. You can have a test screening, and it's a great opportunity because unlike in a live action film, you come in, you've got the film, it's shot, and you'd have to go back to Tunisia to reshoot it. We can just go back, erase something, and change something. You can change very radical things, and we did make a radical change in our film.
This is the process of roughing something out in an emergency. Drawings look terrible. I guess Stitch should be gloating, right? Happy. This is the process of figuring it all out. Once we get all the shots done, then we can go back and clean up because we have to show this in 2 days. Completely rethought sequence. Funnier and less offensive to parents.
Deciding what's appropriate is kind of a tricky thing, but ultimately I think it has to do with what directors end up believing, because it is their movie, and everybody, even though going to pitch in and say this and that, they're going to end up making the decision. There were some of the things that were done and was cut. The stove bit, Stitch ripped out the stove, and he used the gas, the escaping gas, to blow up the house. Which was deemed too violent. And so we changed that approach to more gag type. Jumbo was using a gun originally to chisel him off the ceiling where the whole ceiling falls down, and we replaced it with plates.
And do you remember that rhyme? My mother told me that it's like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Do you remember that? Oh.
No, I never heard that one. There was the one about my mother punched your mother in the nose. What color was the blood?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a chicken by the toe. If he hollers, make him pay $50 every day. My mother told me.
Hello?
Rachel.
Yeah.
When you were a child, on the schoolyard, when you had a nursery rhyme, the eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay, we had a regional difference between Dean and I, how it ended, because ours was like, my mother told me you are it, or something like that. How did it go when you were a kid?
Let's see, catch a tiger, catch
a tiger?
So if he hollers, make him go.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Go on.
My mama told me, let's see. Oh my God.
Nobody can remember, come on.
Hello?
Hey Byron, it's Chris, how you doing?
Hey Chris, how you doing? What's up?
Okay, we had this big question, which was, when you were a kid and you were in the schoolyard and you guys used to do eeny, meeny, miny, mo, how did it end?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yep, that's the one I know.
Oh, is that exactly it?
I think so. Which character is this the same as?
We're talking about the big fight in the house.
Oh yeah?
And the only disparaging comment that came up repeatedly now, like everybody gets the movie, everybody likes the movie, the only disparaging comment is people are still freaked by the violence, and that seems to be centered around one singular event, which is the fight in the house. And it sort of strikes us as funny because it's so extreme, but to the audience, they actually think he's trying to kill Stitch. And
Yeah,
people don't really laugh. So what we did is we opened that sequence up this morning and we're taking a look at it, and we're finding all sorts of things that we can actually make a lot funnier. And we're thinking at the very end, instead of like having the gas turned on and like Jumbo goes ahead and lights the gas basically and blows them both up, that we could fire the gun one last time and something gets jammed in the end of it and it starts blowing up like a big water balloon of death. And it's like overcharging, and so he and Stitch start throwing it back and forth like neither of them wants it, and like while Pleakley runs out, and then we cut back and they're doing this little nursery rhyme because it's funny,
Sure.
and then at the end.
That's Rachel's also. There's that my potato, your potato. How does that go? Oh yeah, it's like sweet potato, one potato, two potato, three potato.
Oh, that's a funnier one.
But isn't like hot? That's like hot potato, isn't it? Like when they
Oh, that's better. That's better.
Forth, right?
Hi.
Hey, Janelle?
Yeah.
Oh, good, I did it right.
What's going on?
This is our question for the day.
Yeah.
When you were a kid and you played hot potato and you threw something back and forth,
Uh-huh.
What was the rhyme that went with it?
Hold on a second. When you played hot potato, what did you say? When you were passing Teresa, what did you say when you... It's Chris and Dean on
Bring
the
Teresa to the phone.
Oh, hot potato, 2 potatoes, 4. 1 potato, hot potato, potato, 4. Can't drop it on the floor.
Are y'all drunk up there?
I loved the bedtime sequence the way it was originally written, and I like the new one too. I wrote them both. I tend to like it when a character sometimes avoids talking about what they really want to talk about. And in that scene, Nani is coming in, her sister, Lilo's sister, and she's coming in and she's doing her best to apologize after this fight. And they're both trying to apologize, and they're both no good at it because they're not grown-ups. And Lilo's apology was the story she told about this poor bear who smelled bad, and he can't help it, and he doesn't want to smell bad, but he can't stop it. And she's basically saying, I don't want to be bad, I can't help it, but I'm really sorry I was. Our test screening, people didn't mind the content of the scene, but the notes came back, I don't like it when the mom yells at Lilo. I don't like it when Lilo's mom does this and mom does that. And apparently people were just not getting that Lilo and Nani were sisters. I thought, I'm going to ruin the scene that I really liked if I rewrite it. And then I had to tell myself, you know something, you wrote it once, you can write it again. So I sat down and wrote it one more time. And if you watch the scene now, Nani comes in and they say 3 times that they're sisters.
I like you better as a sister than a mom. We're sisters. It's our job. And you like me better as a sister than a rabbit, right?
And then Nani tries to say, well, from now on, we're not going to yell at each other. And she tries to say what they should or shouldn't be doing. So she's like, the content of the scene has completely changed. And the problem with people not recognizing that it was sisters went away. And now the scene finishes, and we didn't get bad notes back. We got good notes. I like the sisters. And it's funny, as long as people knew that they were sisters, they didn't mind them yelling at each other. We started with Stitch, who was a little criminal who had a gang. And after a very significant screening, well into production, we realized that the gang wasn't working out. We removed the gang and made Stitch from a gang leader into basically a genetic mutation. He became an orphan.
In the earliest versions of the movie, it was hard to understand who Stitch was because he didn't speak English. He was very childlike, and yet he was a super criminal who had been partners with Jumba. And he'd left Jumba behind after a bank heist and escaped. And the Grand Councilwoman went to Jumba and said, I'll give you your freedom if you can go catch your former partner. It led us to a character that we adored because Stitch was so appealing and so weird, but that didn't really make sense. And it was Roy Disney who said, I don't get Stitch.
Stitch at that time was conceived as a creature designed to be evil, and he was part of a gang of evildoers. And if we were going to convert him in the end to somebody you fell in love with, it seemed to me that was a bad place to start. I remember thinking that we really ought to give him the redeeming quality at the beginning so the audience can pull for him a little more.
We moved away from just being purely distractive to whimsically distractive, because that's what made the character appealing. That he didn't do it almost as a conscious thing, that he did it because he liked loud noises or he delighted in chaos.
What if he's the equivalent of a virus? You know, what if he's a genetic one-off? And so he's a danger in and with himself. He's built to destroy, and so he has to overcome this despite his genetic makeup.
I had a tough time at first because I'd spent a year in Orlando working on Mulan. A year that had become a year when it was supposed to be 3 months. And that was a fairly miserable time because I didn't really do anything. I would work at the studio until 10 o'clock at night. It's in a theme park, so you're constantly surrounded with people having fun and you're engaged in your misery. I didn't really want to go back, but that was the condition of getting to co-direct the film. So I decided, and I made Chris decide with me, that if we go back, there was a policy that was going to be instrumented and that Clark had to be part of this too. A philosophy that we have to get the work done during the regular work week. None of us are going to come in on the weekends unless it's a crunch of a couple weeks, that's understandable. But otherwise, We're going to have lives, you know. None of us are going to get divorces from this. None of us are going to lose our health in the process.
I needed something to fill my off hours, so I determined that I would finally learn to skateboard. I had a garage at the apartment, and I bought a skateboard. I bought a longboard, which is really stable. And as sad as it seems, I went in there at night, and I would skateboard back and forth inside the closed garage, so no one had to see me. And after a few days of that, I felt stable and good enough on that the garage was confining. So about 1 in the morning, the little garage door came up, and I rolled silently out into the parking lot, and I began rolling around my apartment parking lot. And eventually I started skateboarding everywhere.
I would try to fly out on weekends and go to cities I'd never been to, or I took up sea kayaking with Chris, and we'd go, you know, patrol the swamps and the streams around Orlando, or head to the beach. We'd go on road trips. So I think ultimately I really miss it because of the social aspect to it. I would do more on the weekends than I do here in a city that offers so much more to do.
The parking garage right next to the studio was my secret escape. I could go there anytime after work and be guaranteed some kind of fantastic sunset. And that's where I would go to think things through at the end of the day, process everything. And you knew you wouldn't be bothered. Nobody parked on the upper level, so you're always up there just thinking about stuff. Animation is really no different than shooting a live-action film. It just takes longer to get the dailies back.
Animation approvals is our equivalent to the live-action process, where we sit down with the animators, who are our actors, and they bring us their scenes as they've interpreted the voice performance.
And you take a look at it, and it's the part of the process that Dean and I were the most uncomfortable with, because we don't animate. We're story guys.
As first-time directors, Chris and I knew that almost every department was going to be new to us, and we certainly didn't feel like we had the authority to walk in and tell people how to do their jobs. I had some experience in animation, so did Chris, but it was more like from a film school perspective, and we hadn't been established animators. So when it came to animation approvals in particular, we thought rather than sit down and try to correct drawings and tell people how to go about doing their animation, we said, let us talk about it from a story perspective.
If we felt the scene didn't work, we'd say, you know something, I'm not getting this, and we wanted to get this. I want her to feel like she's hiding something. I don't feel like she's hiding anything yet. And then you would open the door to the proper discussion.
He's in his bed with a sleeping cap and a teddy bear, and he's like, oh. Hey, Andreas, it's Chris. We took a look at your scene, and we really liked the first part where she's walking up the stairs. We had one comment on the second one. The scene where she gets to the top of the stairs and she says, I knew it. I think that when we cut to Lilo, Lilo should be like as though we're cutting back to her, and Lilo was astounded. Lilo should be staring right at Nani with her mouth just a little bit open, like she was listening right before we cut back to her. So that when she goes, I knew it, it's going to have that feel that we want to get. Now, on the very first frame, if only you could see it, Dean has done a lovely drawing over the very first frame, and he just kind of brought her left knee up a lot and has her lean forward more. So just get a little bit cuter. Just so it feels like the risers of the stairs are a little taller. Yeah, so let's say, okay, yeah, so it looks like the stairs are a little bit taller for her. The one thing I would do is have her head turned right towards mine from the very beginning. Almost locked off. I mean, she can be traveling, but her head is locked and looking at mine towards me. So, if you have any questions, give me a call back. I'll talk to you then. Bye.
I knew it.
One of the original ideas in the very first book, the very first treatment, was the notion that when Stitch comes to fall in love with the idea of family and Lilo, that when he goes to rescue her, he's not a better person, he just has understood family. So he would go to rescue her using the biggest, most dangerous thing he could find, which I determined to be a 747.
He did this drawing of it. Everybody fell in love with it from the beginning, because it starts as such an intimate story and then ends up in this ridiculous scale.
And it was envisioned to be this really magnificent thing, and it was actually going to be funny.
We also knew that we were operating with a smaller budget. So in order to guarantee that we'd have that scene in the film, we knew it was a priority to get it in early before we'd spent all of our money and before people started coming to us and saying, okay, there's not enough money to have all these effects and have it look as good as you want it to, and therefore, can we do it with a Cessna, like flying by a tree.
One of my dreams was for that moment when the airplane came up through the clouds to be one of those, like, a moment where you would cheer. Like, yay, he came back, and he came back bigger and better than you ever would have expected. And for that reason, I felt that the appearance of the jet should be a complete surprise.
As it went forward, we had a screening, and during this particular screening, it was for the crew. When the 747 came up out of the clouds in pursuit of Gantu's ship and Lilo in the little glass jar, there were spontaneous, thunderous applause. And I thought, wow, we finally got it. We have the moment, you know, where people just couldn't contain themselves, and they burst out, and they started clapping, and I thought, there it is, there it is.
It's one of those moments that when you screened it, a little bit of a change right before that moment could affect that moment a great deal. So the question became, do you show them getting to an airport, getting on the airplane, stealing an airplane before you see it come up through the clouds?
And shortly thereafter, there became this whole discussion. It's like, how do we amplify that? How do we make sure that that happens again? And we began futzing with it.
We had boarded a whole sequence where they run onto an airplane that is full of people and ready to leave, and the stewardess is giving her talk, and they're like, attention passengers, you must get off the airplane, and they scare everybody off the airplane before they steal the airplane.
I thought if we show too much of the 747, it's going to kill the reveal moment. And Chris was of the mentality that it will only strengthen the reveal moment.
I felt as though you should show something of what they're doing before the airplane appeared, because then you'd be confused when the airplane came up.
And I told him, I said, if we do this, if we go forward with this, and there is no applause, if I don't hear thunderous applause from the next audience, we're putting it back. We're going back to the way it was. And anyway, it went back and forth, and I tried to use my story coupon. I have a coupon. This coupon says, this note, good to override one story dispute of medium size.
Medium size. This is not medium. This is the biggest cheer. This is the largest potential cheer of the movie, and you're not
See, it's easy to experiment with because it's finished and it's in color.
Then we're going to have to go back to a sequence that we cut before we put it in production, which is them coming on board and talking to the populace of the airplane. All the people sitting. Yes, because we're afraid there are people on the airplane.
No.
Okay, hey, how about this? The airplane doesn't crash, so they're all okay.
It's not
Maybe it's good to
broken.
take it for a ride. Remember Speed, that movie Speed? All those people in the bus. Woo,
No.
woo.
He scares the pilots, cut to everyone running.
No.
You
know why? You know why you can't? Because you show the jet. You show the jet once, then you're going to be like, oh, but the engine's boring. You know why the engine's boring? Because you know it's coming through the clouds. It's a big old 747, and you even know what color it is.
No,
because you saw it already.
You don't understand.
I'm listening.
Because you're back with Lilo. That's where the rush comes from.
You love
it's
the
when
thrill
she
moment.
looks up and she sees them coming through the clouds in a really dramatic way.
You're right.
And that's when you're cheering for her.
You're
right. Not cheering for them.
No, you're cheering because you are in her place, and you are more in her place if you do not know what's coming to rescue. That woman does not know what she's talking about. That woman is drunk. Don't listen to that.
The lovely Jeff Dutton.
I think a medium story change would affect 20 scenes or less.
Your suggestion is we go through the gate and you hear policemen go, oh no, please tell them we're not going to do this, or something like that. You're like, oh my gosh, they're going to do something big. I wonder what it is. But we only show cestas and stuff, so there's still a surprise when a big, huge 747 comes through. And then as soon as you show it, you do the reveal, and they both wave and stuff, and it bangs Gantu's jet. You cut to the inside and you have Jumba address the passengers, and it's only one. He says, attention passenger.
No.
Attention single passenger. Please see that your seatbelt is
You're
secure.
adding
You
money.
do that.
You're adding money and money.
No, but that's funny because
that's unnecessary at that point.
No, but he addresses the single passenger, and then all of you that are afraid there might be other passengers, so whether we don't see, would be better.
One person was on the plane.
Yeah, please. Attention single passenger, please see that your seat back is in the upright position. Right.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
See?
I thought you were saying that Pleakley was serving a single passenger.
Then you take the liability and you turn it into an asset. See, if life gives you lemons, if production gives you lemons, you make lemonade.
Okay, so I think this is what we're
What do you
talking
think?
about, Jeff.
He loves it.
So when all is said and done, we put all the tracks of sound effects together. It's kind of interesting because you may have built up to 60 tracks of individual sound effects, but you want to basically bring it all together and make it sound incredible. And once we do that, this is what the scene should look like and sound like.
Well, I don't know. Maybe the company is called Four Peaks.
the idea behind sound effects.
Actually, I was walking into the animation studio with Chris on the morning of September 11th, and we had just heard that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And we both thought, oh, it's a Cessna or something, and we didn't know the truth until we actually got into the studio and saw the video broadcasts on the televisions around the studio, and everyone was just transfixed.
I didn't know what to make of it because it seemed like there was an explosion in the tower, but at that point they weren't sure as to what had happened. And then some of the video footage started rolling in of the jet crashing through, and the screaming and the panic, and I was watching live reports as the second tower was hit as well.
On September 11th, 2001, I was in New York at my apartment, and my phone rang. And as I recall, it was Clark and Chris and Dean saying, what are we going to do?
That was about the third thing that went through my head was, oh my God, that sequence in Lilo now is, I don't think we need to be doing that, It was just scarily too close.
When we had all gathered and come back to the studio several days later, we said, just to let you know, we have a new plan in effect. The sequence is already being worked on. We have our modeler already building the new ship. We're taking all of the city streets out and we're replacing them with mountain canyons. And there was just from the California side, from Tom Schumacher and the execs that have said, thanks for doing that. And that was it. There was no real conversation about what is this going to cost us and is it the right thing to do. It was just, everyone knew, let's just change this.
This is fun, what we're doing here. It's very fun, especially because we're totally tired and try to get a tail more. I can see that what they're talking about but this is too like bolted together looking here. You know what I mean?
Right.
I want to go with the forward sweep though. You know what I mean? Because that was what you had, and I like.
Dean wisely said, "Well, we never showed how Pleakley and Jumba got to the planet. Maybe they have a spaceship sitting out in the forest somewhere." And it was a brilliant solution. We animated a quick little bit where they uncover a big red spaceship. I think that the neatest thing that happened within the studio was how everybody came together to make that change.
Oh, cool.
Nebraska, and while they were in the air, they were accompanied by fighter jets off of each wing. This is dramatic.
Okay. Let me hide these. I just figured if we could take 10, 15 minutes just to play with different shapes. Okay, so here.
What if the back? I have a question for you, Chris. What if the back got pinched into a flat?
Oh, I agree. So like a beaver tail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the two.
That was always my.
Brian Jeffcoat, who had been instrumental in building that airplane digitally, took that very same airplane back into his computer and pounded it into the shape of a spaceship. And that was accomplished incredibly quickly.
Not the outside, it was the inward wing.
Yeah, and leaving the underside kind of where it was, just so that the top, so it sort of rotates forward a little bit.
I see what you're saying. This should be over here. Or do we want the, let me bring up the, these things are, that's going to be hard.
Oh, hold on. Well, that's what I was wondering. Like, if we keep this much more organic, more like the back of a whale, I think that keeps it from being 2747. Like this, the straighter things. I'm just, I'll tell you, I'm just suspicious. I get a little suspicious of whenever we get it straight. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's one of the things. And we don't have to bump it up this much. But I was just looking at like, what if we bumped it up more there and then went a little more pinched in the back?
I think there was some sadness, and there was a hope that in years to come, that it would be okay to show the imagery again, because there was so much love and care put into the artwork that went into this film, and the animation and the acting, and we were a machine that was moving at full throttle at that point. From the background painters to the animators, everyone was doing their best work, and it just seems like a shame that it should be vaulted for fear of sensitivities.
It won't be, any sort of shocking revelation like, oh, that's terrible, it's just like 9/11. Actually, it's not much like 9/11 at all. I think it's the sequence actually worked very well the way it was. And it was a very exciting and well-boarded sequence, but I think they'll understand why we, of course, made the changes. But it is interesting to see that, you know, these films aren't made in a vacuum. We do pay attention to the news, and, you know, we try to be sensitive to the people who are watching them.
One of the areas that we cut back in when the budget was set was music. The thought was music wasn't going to play a large role in this film because it wasn't going to be, you know, a Disney musical per se. Now, ironically, music plays a huge role in this film, and it happened over the course of the movie. So as a result, we had to take money from other parts to kind of put it into the different areas. And one of the areas was scoring of the film.
And then came the conversation, who do you want? And so it was like number 1, Alan Silvestri, number 2, Alan Silvestri, number 3, Alan Silvestri, you know. And then we had our list of other people who we also really respected. But we had been using his music to cut our sequences to, temporary sequences to, and it was just such a blend of whimsy and just sincerity that we thought, wow, if we could get Alan interested in this film, then we're set. You know, it would be perfect. And in the end, Alan Silvestri wanted to do it, so he was our top choice, and we were so lucky to have landed that.
Dean and Chris had made a film that was both funny and emotional, and the worst thing you can have is a score that doesn't measure up to that. So I think I probably fought for Alan because he is one of our higher feed composers, but I thought it was really, really important to get somebody of his caliber.
Here we are at Tadeo scoring stage. This is our 3rd time on the stage. And, again with Alan Silvestri conducting in a 10-minute break. So right now everybody's milling about. But in just a minute, the movie magic is going to happen where they make our movie better than it was when we left off. It will look like a better movie when they're done with it. It'll make us look smarter.
This is what we call the land of Dean's lust and envy.
Oh.
It was absolutely awesome, and the thing that nobody realizes, and I did not know until I showed up at the building, is that you walk in and there's the people and they're waiting, and they haven't really, I don't think, opened their music, and they're all talking and they're looking at catalogs, and oh, you had a child last October, oh, he's so cute, and they're all talking, and then at 9 o'clock, tap, 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 they go quiet. Alan goes up to the podium, he says good morning, they all say good morning, and he goes, I think we'll do the chase sequence first. Okay. You hear all these pages open, and these people look at them, they look at Alan, and he races the baton, and boom!
Take a look.
Ooh,
okay. I don't know why that happens.
Wow. San Francisco. No more caffeine for you.
You don't get all this waste like that?
Yeah, it just smooths that over, doesn't it?
Because you can hear the vocals, too.
Yeah,
from his point of view,
definitely
so.
smooths it over. Good. All right.
A number of directors I've worked with have said that there's nothing quite like walking into a soundstage and seeing a conductor give a downbeat and having this room full of people do something so beautifully together. That is just an amazing event, and it's something I think anyone would understand if they saw it. It's a big deal, and that's how magnificent these players are, that they can walk in unrehearsed and get right to the business of making music.
You know, I can't right now. Happy birthday for him or anything like that.
I went to see a hula master, which was arranged for me by the folks at Disney. And for those who have not been in touch with the Hawaiian culture with regard to hula, it's a very serious part of their culture. And the hula masters, I believe they're called kumuhulas, are real teachers in their culture. They don't just teach dance, they preserve the integrity of the language, they teach the culture of the people, and they culturally keep their people connected, even when they're not in Hawaii, to Hawaii.
There wasn't a whole lot of Hawaiian music that would lend itself to the scale and the scope of cinema. It was either really kind of hokey, you know, and like the bad impression of, you know, studio movie Hawaii that Hawaiians don't particularly like. Yeah, you know, like the sort of hula on the beach stuff, which you know, Hawaiians aren't particularly fond of that because it's kind of a misrepresentation that they're, you know, just these party people that are always grass skirts and doing hula on the beach. And then on the other side of it, there was a lot of the ancient chant, but very sparse, you know, and in the way it's supposed to be. So we had initiated a discussion. How do we get to a place where we can have music that feels really authentic and magical and moving and, you know, all that stuff that we love about Hawaii and hula and the ancient chants, and yet have it feel appropriate to the scale.
So I met this fascinating man and kind of explained to him the dilemma that we were in, and that you know, we were looking for this kind of music and we thought it might be out there, but we sure hadn't found it. And the first man he talked to me about was this man named Mark Omalu, and he said, this man he's doing some really interesting things with his music and with the Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian music. And he played me a CD that Mark Omalu had done. And boy, I just thought, I couldn't wait to get back and tell the guys about this.
Well, that's not the story I heard. When I talked to Alan about it, he had sat down with Kuneva and said, hey, we want to do this thing. Who should we go to? Who could take original Hawaiian chants and maybe help us make them a little bit bigger?
And he had a list of names. He said, you could talk to this person, you could talk to this person, you could talk to this person, and then there's Mark.
But you don't want him. And Alan said,
that's the guy I want to talk to. He made a point of insisting that he speak with Mark. And almost as quickly as our local guy had mentioned it, he withdrew the information and he just said, I don't know, because Mark was a little bit of a, as Alan described him, he was kind of the James Dean of Hawaii. He was a little bit of a rebel because he was taking fundamentals and doing new things with them.
That's what I heard.
You know, when we first met, Mark was like, looking at me like, I don't really know if I want to go into this world. There's some guy, some like Hollywood guy coming up with, you know, with talking to him about his music, Disney, business people, contracts, lawyers, and
I met Alan Silvestri and Dean, Chris, and Clark, and I said, then I have to learn how to talk nice and be proper, and my English ain't that good. I just felt really unconfident, self-conscious about myself. And then when I met them, I found out that they were just as crazy as I was. I said, no, they're not.
Okay. Natehia ukula. Kaholo.
Alan Silvestri's recordings of Mark and his hula dancers up at their halau was so moving. You know, he sent us a CD of some recordings that he had made. He just dropped up. They were in a strip mall, and they have this little, I guess it was once a karate studio. It's been turned into a hula halau. It's across from a donut shop. And he sat there, you know, with these terrible acoustics and recorded these guys going through some of their songs. And they all sort of join in and chant in tandem. Wow. It was so moving. It was the best representation of what we were looking for.
Some of the original lyrics that Mark had written to the couple tunes that we eventually used were really historic Hawaiian text. But they were very specific to the history of Hawaii, events that occurred. And we really wanted the lyrics to be much more centered on our film and about the joy of Hawaiian culture and the people. So he virtually rewrote everything to the music that we and Alan had selected and then arranged. But it's all in Native Hawaiian, and it's all very specific to the film. The kids got a kick out of singing because some of the Hawaiian roller coasters also obviously in English and a lot of fun for them. But anything that was Hawaiian was original and true to the language.
Pick up the pace there. Step, 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 step. That's all we're doing, okay? Remember, only get right, left, right. 1, 2, left, right, left. 1, 2, 3, hold it. 1, hold it. This is 1, pull it. 1, pull it. 1, turn, step, good. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, cog hit 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You're cheating. You have to put the fourth motion in. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3.
The opening song for the movie, we do it in several different ways and with several different implements. And they were looking for something that a certain type of move and stuff. So we choreographed it to give them what they were looking for, this type of spins and things, to make it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, I guess.
Mark Keali'iho'omalu, who wrote the title song, had used pieces of chants in that title song, which is a touchy thing. The title song also had these wonderful children's voices. The Kamehameha Choir came in and sang that song.
I'm the music teacher at the elementary, as well as the course director. And choir is after school. So we rehearse Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday after school, 2:30 to 3:15. So it's kind of like an extracurricular activity. I started working in about 1989, and at that point, the chorus program was just started, and they wanted to start a children's chorus. And so when I came in, we would be practicing at recess time, and then eventually it became an after-school activity. And I think we started with about 20-something kids, and then it just began to grow, and then it got to a point where the kids have to audition to be a part of choir. Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop. She was part of the Kamehameha lineage, King Kamehameha's lineage. And she had no children, and she left her legacy and her land and her estates to start the Kamehameha schools. The school was started in 1887. It's just amazing how it has just grown, and how what she as a woman started and how it has just benefited the Hawaiian culture and the Hawaiian people, and we're so grateful to her. And for my own children who attend the schools, it's such a blessing for them to be a part of that, and we're just so grateful to her and her generosity and what she has done for the Hawaiian people to help perpetuate the Hawaiian culture. Good. Never gonna leave you behind. Friends forever. First time we met Chris, Dean, and Clark, it was actually in my classroom. It was the day before we were going to go to the studio and make the recording. And the kids were a little bit nervous, and we were practicing the song, and they showed up at our classroom door, and we introduced them, and they said, go ahead, continue your rehearsal. So we just sang the song, and they kind of just stood there. And, you know, after they told us that, they were just really moved by the kids, and they were overwhelmed, I guess, and it wasn't what they were expecting.
The first time the audience is going to see that Stitch is starting to realize that he's missing something. So in the very beginning, like, this is the first time that he has ever showed interest in anything. So at the very beginning, like this very first scene, like everything in this, every scene like is for a certain purpose in the story. So the very first scene when he sits up and he's clapping and he's pointing, when you watch the whole film, that's the first time he's ever showed interest in anything. And then he realizes he's not acting like a dog, so he sits back down and stuff like that. And then a little while later, you're gonna, as you saw, like when he's watching them all playing and he's watching them all together and stuff, he's starting to think, well, maybe I want to try this. And so the best way to demonstrate that was like when he's watching them build the sandcastle, you know, he tries building one too. And then he's trying to do it, but like after he builds his sandcastle, it's just no good if nobody else is there.
It was pretty amazing. When we went in a couple days later and actually recorded it, of course all the parents came along, but the studio was really, really tiny. So all the parents were outside kind of milling about and having coffee while we were inside doing the songs, which we had to do at night because the kids were in school during the day. And so we did, after we finished recording them, we said to the parents, do you want to come in and hear the kids? And they said absolutely. So they all came in, and we could only do it in small groups because we were in a really small room looking at the monitor. So there's a little teeny TV screen of the actual scenes from the film. Now, no one's seen any of this before, right? They know that they're going to be in an animated film called Lilo and Stitch, but they know nothing really about the film. So they come in, and for the first time, they're looking at the first few images from this movie, and they're hearing their own voices. And for a lot of the kids and the parents, it really brought tears to their eyes, which of course brought tears to our eyes, because it was just this magical experience. Christine and myself wanted to show the movie to the kids and to the parents before anybody else in the United States saw this movie. So we bought our own plane tickets, we flew out to Honolulu, we got a theater, and we showed the movie to them. And from that moment on, I think all of us have bonded in a way that if they ever come to LA, you know, they'll come stay with us, and if we ever go to Hawaii, they completely take care of us.
Elvis was one of those things that you arbitrarily assign a character when you're building them. And I like Elvis a lot, so I built into Lilo's initial description that she loved Elvis.
When we knew that we wanted to use the Elvis music, I contacted a friend, Marty Olnick, who basically ran their sort of special products and licensing for RCA.
Dean designed and wrote a sequence around Elvis music. It's the one where when her sister comes home, Lilo's lying on the floor and she's morose, and she says, leave me alone to die, and she's got her little record playing.
Lilo, we don't have time for this.
Leave me alone to die.
And then he went and did another sequence themed to Elvis music, and he became really the musical theme of the film.
We wanted to do multiple songs. We also wanted to put the Elvis songs on a soundtrack, which had never been on any other product other than RCA. So this was going to be a first that a Walt Disney soundtrack would have as many as 6 or 7 Elvis songs on it.
And so you can move from score right into an Elvis song, right back into score. If it's working, it's like nothing ever happened.
There are 3 or 4 things you need permission to do with Elvis in media. One of them is you can't show him without permission.
Elvis Presley was a model citizen.
You can't really talk about him without permission.
You look like an Elvis fan.
You can't imitate him without permission. You can't change the lyrics of one of his songs without permission. And we had done all 4.
They allowed us to enhance the record slightly so that it would line up better with the picture image. I don't think that had ever been done before.
So we did have to go to the Elvis estate and ask them if they thought this was a really cool thing to do or not. And we had a terrific screening where the representatives of Elvis's estate came out, and they came to our Southside Theater. And I remember them so clearly because they were so awesome. They had all their dark glasses on, and they went into the theater and they watched the movie. And one guy left his glasses on through the whole thing. And they came out and they were very complimentary. They were very supportive of everything we did. And they really became terrific friends through the whole thing. We went to Nashville to record Winona Judd doing her song.
Winona's agent had contacted me a couple years earlier saying that she would be interested in working on an animated film. So I sort of always had that tucked in the back of my head. But when this song was chosen, and as I looked at sort of a list of candidates of the kind of singers who could sing it, she can sing Elvis better than anyone.
It was fantastic. They brought in studio musicians that were so good at what they did. And our producer was amazing, and Winona came in. We were actually in a studio that was converted from an old church. And so just the space itself was magnificent.
Won't you help me? I feel like I'm slipping away. It's hard to breathe. My chest is just heating. Lord of mercy, burning a hole in me. Yeah, 'cause your kisses lift me higher, like the sweet song of the choir. You light my morning sky, burning love.
One general apology. I wanted every single thing to be painted when I came, and most of it is, except for my hand painter who was doing Lilo's face, had dog problems and her dog had to go to the hospital, and that's kind of a pretty good excuse. So they're not done.
Okay.
But
this is fantastic. I have a question. When they do her, when they paint her, they're going to put a little bit of a blush on her.
Yes.
Is there, on this one here, they have a little bit of an airbrush darker nose, which looks really cute. Will they be able to do that, do you think?
if you want it, yeah.
This is like something, I mean, no joke, it's like if you went to the actual Geppetto's little workshop, this is the kind of like things you have. Great colors. Oh my god. This is...
Look at this.
My doll.
Oh
my god. Oh, that is so choice. You have a lot of really cool accessories, and the accessories on this could be the bucket and little things inside the bucket. There wouldn't be a ton of little parts, but there'd at least be like this little tiny sandcastle that would be kind of elaborate, like with a little front, little tower.
That would be cute.
See, that'd be cool.
Welcome to our film.
She looks a little crazed, which I like. She's a little crazed, isn't she? Just a little bit.
Go for some tight zoom on those. You gotta see Nani's eyes.
He's not doing it very
Don't
well.
forget Nani's
Her
hammock.
back side's gotta be.
Put Nani in her hammock, please.
There we go. That moment.
I brought you a cube. I brought you a cube.
I would like to look at my Viewmaster. It was a little large.
Don't worry, she's got the eyes
But
for
I'd
it though.
like to see into it that they're like, oh man.
This is kind of a good angle right here. She's like, eventually, this Stitch, you will spring load his mouth open, and his teeth randomly become triggers, and you keep poking his teeth down until he snaps shut on your finger. Thus, much fun will be enjoyment will be had from this.
The marketing of the movie is interesting because no one knew how to sell it. First off, no one could say it. Lilo and Stitch, they couldn't say the long E sound for Lilo. For whatever reason, no one could get the name. They would see the movie and say, I loved Lilo. Like, what are they thinking?
We discussed lots of different options, and one of the options was make these little microfilms that maybe show Lilo and Stitch. They're going to the grocery store, and so you get to know the characters. That we felt wasn't a really good option because the whole idea of the film is that these two characters are at odds, and to show them as friends, I don't think was going to be a good thing for the movie.
Chris and Dean came up with this idea of Stitch invading other films.
What if we did the whole opening of The Lion King, we just replayed the opening of The Lion King, and when Rafiki holds up Simba, this little warthog goes,
"Hey, that's not Simba."
And he looks, and it wasn't Simba, it was Stitch, and he just drops him and runs, and everybody runs, and everybody's like, what is that? Like he did actually land in the Disney universe where he wasn't supposed to be.
And that idea was a real home run, and that was theirs. And that gave rise to the idea that Stitch was the way into the movie for people.
Can we have him walk into Snow White? Can he walk into Sleeping Beauty? Can he walk into The Little Mermaid and stuff like that? So we went back and found 4 good candidates that he could like bump into these films. And it was Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, and Lion King. And they had varying degrees of work that we had to do to get him to walk into them. The one that was the most work was The Little Mermaid, because that film wasn't done in the computer. That film was still all hand inked and painted and stuff. So any scene he had to drop into we had to go back and re-clean up that scene and recomposite it in the computer. Going back to those original films and having Stitch drop into them necessitated in at least 3 of them that the characters react. Like Rafiki could just run away, so he could scream run away, that was no big deal. But in the case of, for example, The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, Beauty and the Beast was the first one we had to go back to the original voice and have her do a new line.
Get your own movie.
And she was actually in a recording studio. And so you heard her voice and she's like, now what do you want me to do? And she sounded so sweet and nice. And we said, well, we explained we're gonna do this trailer for this film. This little monster shows up and he like makes this chandelier fall right in the middle of you and the Beast dancing. And you're gonna leave and you're gonna say this thing to him. And she said, you mean I'm mad at him? And we said, yes, no, it's not mad, it's, you're disappointed. You're disappointed because your evening was ruined. And she's like, okay. And she was so sweet. For Aladdin, we told him the setup. We were all excited, of course. We're like, it's so funny because, you know, you're on the carpet and you're with Jasmine and you're falling in love and this little guy shows up with this giant spaceship. Wait, so she leaves with him?
Yeah, baby.
And you're like, yeah, it's funny. Well, not really. It didn't really happen. It just pretend. And then the last one was The Little Mermaid, was Ariel. And she came in, the same thing. We were so excited about the setup. So it was great. Oh my gosh, you're in the middle of your song, and this wave comes. Ruins your song, and you're going to come out of the water, and you're going to hit him with a starfish.
I was singing here.
I hit him? The horror on her face that was written on her face, and you're like, yeah, you really do. You're just really mad at him.
Even that didn't tell you what the movie was, but it told you you wanted to connect with the character, and we knew people would connect with Stitch if they had a chance to.
I think those trailers really worked to get the audience in a way prepared for who Stitch was when they did see the movie.
These started showing on the Disney Channel, and they became so popular that people were begging for the commercial, in a sense, because they weren't really positioned as commercials. They were just these little featurettes, these little fun ideas.
I just saw an article in a magazine was 50 greatest trailers of all time, and we are at number 21.
Roy Disney has this 737 that he took us to the Cannes Film Festival.
Okay, video diary, take 1. We took the red eye from Orlando this morning, very early this morning. Then went to the studio. I slept on the floor for the most part, and went to the doctor for my throat, got some medicine. Then we headed off to dinner with Roy and Patty, and got on their swell jet. And now we're taking the second red eye over to Nice, so that we can go to Cannes.
So don't you wonder if like one little bolt comes loose, are we in trouble? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Actually 2 1/4 by 4 1/4. Yeah.
Okay.
That way,
5, 6, 10. Not sure.
It's right.
It is the magic. The movie, you, on Lilo and Stitch. Eccoci qua.
I love your movie.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's the best one of the Disney history.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Whoa, thank you very much.
Hi, Shelly.
Hi.
I'm from Israel.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet
Very
you. I'm
nice to
Dean.
meet
Suddenly you're thrust in front of cameras and you're expected to say intelligent things and sound really introspective, and so we had some difficulty with that, but the whole experience was a little surreal because we went from being, as I said, in Florida, you know, working with familiar faces every day, to being on Roy Disney's 737 personal jet flying to the Cannes Film Festival, you know, to screen our film for international press and talk about the making of the film and how it had changed all of our lives.
This is Raya.
When you watch Entertainment Tonight or any news show, you see images from Cannes that you can't figure out. Like, you see people on boats, like arriving at docks and then going to parties, like James Bond. And you're like, I don't get it. Where are they coming from? Is there an island that they live on or they sleep on and they come out? And when you actually get there, it's fantastic because there's a huge excitement about being there. Of course, I just was so excited to be there. But the cool thing was going, I see, that's the dock, and you get to the dock and you come up and you go to a party and they're probably coming from another hotel and you see how the hotels are laid out and you're just like, I'm here, and you're just so anxious to get your picture taken. I would hold my little camera up and like, I'm here in Cannes, and I'm so excited. And everybody is so attractive. You're more attractive. You feel more attractive in Cannes. And just standing in the hotel lobby, just like, I'm a better person just for standing here. It's fantastic.
Where are we? We are in front of the Uffizi, and we won't be able to visit the Uffizi because we don't have tickets. A lot of work left. They want to restore the whole thing.
Got a good shot. Okay, do it.
Lilo and Stitch, 1, 2, 3.
I was not at a party, but I think there was a lot of smoke because it's hard for me to talk this morning. What I do have is amazing pastry. I have porridge, cafe, and jam. I would like on your little Christian oven. Oh yes, yeah. Your Christian oven. Oh yeah. The coffee here rules, and there's lots of sugar. Hello, Mr. Pretzel. You're very beautiful. You are very beautiful yourself, so I see. Finally, the porridge. I shall plug myself in. I just love my breakfast this morning. I love my breakfast. And out here is a beer garden. Ow.
Hollywood Boulevard, it was a premiere. It was huge. We closed down the boulevard. We arrived in limousines. We had grandstands full of people. And it was about 100 million degrees, and they had all these HMI lights that were even hotter, pointed down on us. It was great. It was brilliant.
The first stage of the red carpet is where all the photographers are. And they're poised to take, snap a million photos. And they were trying to let a lot of the celebrities go by so that they had their turn to be photographed.
It was a common experience to walk up in front of people, a horde of people with cameras, and they would hesitate because they're like, okay, he's on the carpet and he's looking at us, so we probably should take his picture. And then somebody would go, this is Chris and Dean, they are the directors of the film.
And you can see the cameramen sort of reluctantly raising their cameras whatever, the consolation snap. So there's click, 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 click. And I think 2 or 3 of them got snapped. And all of a sudden one guy screamed, "There's Phil Collins!"
And they all went, huh? And all the photographers turned and pointed way far away and like.
They had to hurry us back. First they moved us away, and then they brought us back to the beginning of the line again to reintroduce us.
He pushed us up again and said, "This is Chris and Dean. They directed the film," and it was like, "Oh, thanks."
It is pretty funny at your premiere when, you know, someone not associated with the film is much more interesting.
It happens a lot, and it's just nice to be there, and you sort of feel for them, because yeah, you're not going to end up in People magazine unless you're somehow lurking behind somebody else, like if you're lurking behind Phil Collins.
The premiere in Honolulu, which was great, because we got to see Jason Scott Lee and Tia, and a lot of the local press, and you know, just a lot of people coming up and giving us very warm thank yous for treating their culture respectfully, and how much they liked the film, and glad that they could be a part of it. We had the Kamehameha kids around, and you know, it was just a lot of fun. We had a premiere across the street from Graceland.
We got our own little tour of Graceland.
We had a special tour of the Elvis archives, all the stuff that's not on display.
And the really nice lady that took us through, she had her gloves on, and she's like, "Well, is there anything you want to look at?"
I actually pointed at a box and said, "What's that?"
And inevitably she'd say, "Oh, that's a great choice," and she'd bring it down.
The archivist was able to sort of take out the box and open it up and said toiletries.
And his high karate cologne bottle was there. And we said, "Can we smell it?"
And I got to smell it.
The very same cologne that he smelled every day, we smelled. That was wonderful.
Here it is, opening day, Tom.
It's opening day. It's June 21st.
Do you have anything to advise us as debut directors? Anything to calm our nerves?
Well, I have things to calm your nerves. I always carry Xanax in my briefcase. We were just talking about that. You know, when you have to put this in context. Your friends won't read every review which you're reading. No matter how sensitive you want everybody to be, they won't be. And you have to know, and by the way, having been here now 16 times, you have to know you made an amazing movie. It's the best campaign we've done, it's the best movie we've done, and now we just have to offer it up to God and hope that Satan doesn't cross your path.
You nervous, Chris?
I think I'm not nervous, I'm sad, because that's what it is, I'm just like, I don't know why.
You know, that I will tell you both, though, that, and there's no way to avoid this, is the profound depression that commences this weekend is not about what the movie does this weekend. It isn't. It's that you're done. And you wanted to be done, and you wanted to finish, but now you are done. And I can tell you that if the film does fantastic this weekend, or if it does like just darn good, which it'll do one or the other, you'll be depressed.
Really?
You'll be depressed. Because you do this, and also what happens, look at this week, you have been the center, well, the past 4 weeks, you've been the center of everyone's attention. They made sure you got up, they took care of you, and every room you go into, you meet people who love the movie. And they love you for making the movie, and they all mean that very sincerely. But tomorrow, they'll have to go love somebody else.
It's true.
And you're going to be at home wondering if you can ever tap into such specialness again. Because if you think you know how you got this movie done, that's the one thing I can tell you don't. Is it came out of some place other than just intellect. So it's December 2nd, 2003. It's basically 5 years since we started the film. It's a little over 2 years since September 11th, which made us make very large changes in this movie. And as I look back, I realized that for Christine and myself, it was our first time to make a film. And that experience you can never have again. As you're going through the process, everything's a first-time experience, and you don't know what the next step is going to bring. And there's something exciting and exhilarating about that. And when we do it again, it just won't be there the same way, because we'll actually kind of know what to anticipate and expect. And in this case, even all the way up until the premiere, we had no idea what to expect, and no idea what the feelings were going to actually be, because you're experiencing it for the first time.
The great thing about the reviews that we had, they almost all cited that this was a very odd film. It was a very unusual film, which is what we were really going for. And everything that we tried to achieve, it came through, which was nice. Like it or not, it came through, and people said, this is a very odd film, but I liked it. And that was a very consistent comment throughout all the reviews, which is what we had really set out to do. We wanted story adventure. We wanted to make a film that was purposely, in a sense, odd, that was unpredictable, that wouldn't fit nicely into any sort of pigeonhole that you might think of. So that's what we're really setting out to do.
If I was going to offer any advice, if I was going to impart a word of wisdom to someone just starting out, I would just pass on the advice that was given to me from my mentor, Joe Grant. And he said to me once, if it's easy, then you shouldn't be doing it. You know, always take the more difficult path. When it comes to storytelling or any form of art, if it seems like it's more difficult, then that's the path you should be doing. You know, you should carry on challenging yourself. And that's what we try to do with this film. And we learned a lot from it, and we're going to take that into our next projects.